A few days ago, I heard two words that should make every student of history uncomfortable. No limits. When I first heard them, I assumed they came from a dictator, or maybe some long-dead emperor convinced he was untouchable. I was wrong. They came from the President of the United States. Shortly after the Versailles Agreement was signed, Axios journalist Mark Caputo sat down with President Trump. Caputo asked what sounded like a philosophical question. What did this conflict teach you about the limits of power? Trump didn't hesitate. My power has no limits. Caputo thought he must have misheard. So he asked again, "You mean no limits?" Trump doubled down. No limits. And suddenly I wasn't thinking about Iran anymore. Because history is full of leaders who believed they had no limits. History is much shorter on examples where reality agreed. That's what tonight's story is really about. Not Iran, not ceasefires, not oil. It's about what happens when a government starts confusing the ability to make announcements with the ability to shape reality. Because over the next few minutes, we're going to encounter three extraordinary claims. That America achieved total victory, that Iran surrendered unconditionally, and that regime change succeeded. The strange part? The deeper you look at each claim, the harder it becomes to find the victory hiding underneath. And by the end, we'll arrive at a simple question. If you have to spend billions of dollars, redefine your objectives, and declare success before the results arrive, did you win? Or did you just change the definition of winning? Let's begin. On the eve of the G7 summit in Versailles, the United States and Iran signed what became known as the Islamabad Memorandum. 24 hours later, Caputo sat down with the president. Trump looked tired, but there was something else there. A determination. A determination to convince the world that what had just happened wasn't a compromise. It was a triumph, a historic triumph, a military triumph. The kind of triumph that future generations would supposedly study. He declared that America had totally defeated Iran. Totally defeated. Let's pause there. When most people hear total victory, they imagine the other side broken, disarmed, unable to continue the fight. But reality had other ideas. Iran never relied on a conventional navy to challenge American power. Instead, it turned the Strait of Hormuz into something closer to a giant maritime minefield. Fast attack boats, coastal drones, mines, layer upon layer of disruption. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz wasn't just a risk, it was a blockade in everything but name. Forget the insurance premiums. Those calculations became meaningless the moment the missiles started flying. Think about that. For 108 days, the world's most important energy corridor was effectively under Iranian control. Without Tehran's explicit permission, nothing moved. And despite the full weight of American naval power, that blockade held. That brutal, stubborn fact, that the most powerful navy on Earth could not reclaim the right of passage, is what finally forced Washington to the negotiating table. Now ask yourself the hard question. Does this look like total victory? Or does it sound like a costly, sobering reminder of exactly how limited that power actually was? Listening to the president describe this as a perfect military success felt like watching someone stand in front of a smoking crater and compliment the landscaping. And that's the first brick in what I'm calling the Versailles Illusion. A retreat dressed as a parade. A compromise dressed as a conquest. A reality dressed as a headline. But the naval story isn't even the most interesting part. My favorite part is the surrender. Because before the war, the White House position was crystal clear. Nothing short of unconditional surrender. No compromise. No ambiguity. No middle ground. Unconditional surrender. Then came the agreement. And suddenly the language became flexible. Caputo pointed out that the memorandum looked a lot more like a negotiated settlement than a white flag. Trump waved it away. It's probably really an unconditional surrender. Probably. Caputo asked the obvious follow-up. Is it? Trump answered, I think so. I actually stopped the interview. Not metaphorically. Literally. I paused it and stared at the screen. Because that's a remarkable answer. Imagine announcing that you've reshaped the strategic future of the Middle East, then being unsure whether the other side actually surrendered. I think so. That's the answer? Let's translate this into everyday language. If you sell your house and somebody asks whether you signed the paperwork, you don't answer. I think so. If you get married and somebody asks whether you're married, you don't answer. I think so. Yet somehow we're discussing the outcome of a major war with the confidence level of a man trying to remember whether he left the oven on. And the agreement itself raises even more questions. The country that supposedly lost is receiving reconstruction assistance. Frozen assets are being released. Major issues are being deferred to future negotiations. Missiles? Later. Proxy networks? Later. The nuclear threat? Later. Long-term regional security? Later. Everything important gets moved to another conversation. At some point, you have to ask, if the winner is paying the bill, who exactly lost? That's the second brick in the Versailles Illusion. A surrender that looks suspiciously like a negotiation. A victory that arrives attached to an invoice. Then we arrive at the crown jewel. Regime change. This is the moment that made me yell at my laptop. Caputo asked a straightforward question. How can this be regime change if the political system itself remains intact? Trump's answer was breathtaking in its simplicity. They're different people now. The previous supreme leader is gone. His son has assumed power. Therefore, regime change. By that logic, McDonald's replacing a shift manager is a corporate revolution. The uniforms are the same. The building is the same. The menu is the same. But technically a different person is holding the clipboard. Anyone familiar with Iran understands the larger problem. The institutions remain. The ideology remains. The security apparatus remains. The power structure remains. What changed was the face at the top. And here's the irony. The smooth transfer of power wasn't evidence of failure. It was evidence that the system worked exactly as designed. The succession mechanism functioned. The structure absorbed the shock. The machine kept running. Yet somehow we're being told this proves the machine was destroyed. That's not regime change. That's succession. And that's the third brick in the Versailles Illusion. A victory announced at the exact moment the other side's contingency plan successfully activates. So why work so hard to sell the narrative? The answer appears throughout the interview. Oil prices, stock prices, market reactions, green arrows, economic indicators. The administration increasingly evaluates success through the lens of immediate market stability. Once the alarm stopped sounding, the mission became a success. But that's not how ordinary people experience reality. Most Americans don't live inside stock indexes. They live inside grocery stores, gas stations, rent payments, utility bills. For families struggling to get through the month, a soaring market can feel as distant as a weather report from Mars. The disconnect matters, because the public was promised decisive results, not carefully reworded objectives, not retroactive definitions of success. Results. Near the end of the interview, Caputo brought up another concern. What happens if Israel launches a new military operation and destabilizes the entire arrangement? Trump brushed it aside. The relationship is great. Everything is fine. Then he added a phrase that stopped me cold. We need to keep him sane. Keep him sane. Think about that. We are talking about the leader of America's most vital strategic partner in the Middle East. When the President of the United States publicly questions the mental stability and erratic decision-making of his own allies' leadership, it sounds less like high-stakes diplomacy and more like a desperate family intervention. And the plan? Trust me, they'll listen. That confidence runs through the entire story. The confidence that every problem can be managed, every complication can be controlled, every reality can be negotiated. But reality is stubborn. Reality does not care about narratives. Reality does not care about headlines. Reality does not care about press conferences. The administration wanted unconditional surrender. It got a compromise. It wanted regime change. It got succession. It wanted decisive victory. It got an agreement whose final consequences remain unknown. And that's why I keep thinking about those two words. No limits. Because every generation eventually discovers the same lesson. Power always has limits. Military power, economic power, political power, even imperial power. The question isn't whether those limits exist. The question is how much damage gets done before leaders discover where they are. Empires rarely get into trouble because they lose battles. More often, they get into trouble because they convince themselves they won them. The president says power has no limits. Reality has spent all of human history disagreeing. And reality is still undefeated. Good night.